So it is going to be live because it is a public meeting, and so we do that, so it's open to anybody. So as soon as we are live, I will just say, this is what I told you, and we'll turn the time to Stephanie. And then she will answer any of our questions, or just to give us lots of information. Stephanie.
Yeah, I'll give you guys a little lowdown on me, and we'll have some conversation, and I'm excited to be here tonight.
Okay, we're happy to have everyone here with us tonight. We have Stephanie Russell here, who is the Economic Development Director from Weber County. And so this is going to be a casual conversation. She's going to present information, and we're just really happy to have her with us. So if you have questions, anything, this is one, this is not one where you sit and listen. This is when we ask. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Mayor. I'm really happy to be here with you folks today. I'm Stephanie Russell. I'm Weber County's Economic Development Director. I also do government relations for the county. And as a really fun side business, I manage the sewer district in the unincorporated West Weber corridor. So I'm going to give you guys just a tiny bit of background on me so you kind of know where I'm coming from and my philosophy as it relates to economic development and community development. My background starts at city government. I work for cities in the state of Georgia, and my graduate degrees are in historic preservation and public history. I started my career in government working as a Main Street manager, which is a program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation in the state of Georgia. It's kind of a big deal to be a designated Main Street. And then worked my way up to the state level, where I worked for the Municipal League, and I worked for the state managing a state-run program that was tailored to come into cities and other jurisdictions to teach them how to do what we call bottom-up place-based development. And I've been coming to several of your meetings, and you may have seen me at some of your meetings, just to get a feel for thank you, Malcolm, just to get a feel for your community and what you guys do. As a service of Weber County and Weber County's Economic Development Department, I do consultation for cities, and it's kind of similar to what I was doing on the state level in the state of Georgia with the Municipal League, where I come in and I meet with your stakeholders. We create an environment of open dialogue. We create a stakeholder team, and I'll talk a little bit more about this program in just a second. And we do some mining. We do some narrative mining. We do some mining of vision and what it is that you guys really want to be and who you want to be and what you want to be. And I'll talk a minute about that. So that's one of the services that I offer for economic development. I currently am doing consultation with Huntsville City. I've done consultation with strategic planning with Harrisville. I work really closely with Riverdale and Roy and obviously Ogden. So what we're trying to do in the county is create synergy amongst the cities, but also maintaining your unique identity. It's really important that you have a unique identity as a city and as you're going through your development process and looking at your economics and your potential. Everything that you guys do contributes to the good of the whole of not just the county, but the actual region from a social, a community, and economic development standpoint. So I'm here as a facilitator. That's it. I'm not here to tell you what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing. I'm here to provide you with tools, best practices, and to help you mine your narrative for who you want to be when you start doing your development projects. So what I want to do before I kind of go over what this looks like, to see if you guys are interested in having me come to your city and do this type of sessioning and facilitation, what I really want to do is go around the room and do introductions. I want to know who you are, and I want to know what your interest is in as it relates to community and economic development in the city, and why you're here tonight. So, we know Mayor.
I'm Jason McCormick, recently appointed to the Planning Commission, here to learn more ways that we can progress and address the needs of Hooper as a city as a whole for the benefit of Hooper and the residents as well.
I'm Shauna Ray, and I lived in the city, and I'm here offer my services. I've got some time and knowledge when it comes to being, more knowledge just about the county and stuff like that, but it's just helping with, kind of giving them ideas of what kind of direction it needs to go and how, just kind of here to help, be that kind of person. Yeah, just help them out.
Blake Severing on the planning commission. I'm here to learn, I guess, how we can better use the tools available to us to not maintain, but to control and develop the city how we envision it. I mean, we all know development's coming, but it's how we go about it smartly instead of just let anything come in, So, any tools we can learn.
I'm Bryce Wilcox, and I'm on the city council, and I'm here because I love meetings. I'm just kidding. No, I want to hear.
And that's the thing I will promise you, I will keep these
No,
sessions
I'm just teasing.
at a reasonable time. I don't like a lot of
I'm
meetings.
curious to what you have to say, and hopefully there'll be some useful information for us.
I'm Dale Fowers, also on the city council, and I'm here to just learn.
Travis Bates, concerned citizen, just here because I like to support our city.
Amanda Prince, Planning Commission, and just here to listen.
I'm here to learn and be informed and see what's progress and new stuff.
Karen, make you ditto to everything that everybody just said.
Hi, I'm Brian Steckline, and I'm serving on some newly formed committee that the city has, and just here to learn and to see how I can help.
Melinda Steckline, here to learn.
Okay, great. So you guys are the stakeholders. That's how we start. So it's really important as you're looking at your stakeholder team that you have a good representation of what I call your demographic. And it's not just your economic demographic. We want to have a good representation on your team for your culture, your history, your economics, your social. You want to involve as many people on your team that you feel would bring that want to participate. For one, we don't like a closed table, we like an open table, that really have a stakehold and a level of participation that's going to be valuable to the activities that we're doing. So I'm going to give you an overview of what the program looks like. Once again, this is completely up to you if you want to go through this or not. Tonight's just an introduction, and then you can get with the mayor and let her know if this is something that you would like to do. It is a free service that we offer in the county level. I'm on my third session with Huntsville right now, and it's been incredibly productive for them. And just a little background on them. So they're a very teeny tiny town up in the Ogden Valley. Ogden Valley just incorporated, so they're sitting there going, wow, what are we going to do? Economically, we're in a standstill. Our little downtown, their little downtown's kind of falling apart, and they really want to take a look at what they have and what direction they can go in. And that's really, once again, I'm the facilitator. You guys would drive this train, but I'm here to help guide you down the track. So this is kind of what the sessions would look like. I'll give you a little bit of an outline and then I'll pass these out. So first session, the most important thing we do is we talk about your demographics. We really deep dive into your demographics. Who lives in Hooper? Who are these people? I'm sorry, yes, you live in Hooper. But like really dive into the demographics. Like what is your demographics? And that would also include looking at your housing stock, looking at your businesses, really looking at the composition of Hooper from a social and an economic standpoint. Does that make sense? Like taking a really good look at where you're at right now, current, present day. And then taking a look at your projections for growth. What is your growth projections going to look like? And we work with Kempsey Gardner Institute to get that information for you, so it's pretty accurate. It's pretty good information based on census projections and that type of that type of thing. They're very keyed in with the state. Then we do something what I like to call your community asset inventory. So a lot of times communities don't have an idea of what they truly have. And knowing what you have and knowing your demographic gives you what we call a baseline to work off of. And so we'll sit down and we'll really look at your assets. And we're not just talking about your land. We're not just talking about, how many retail stores you have or how many houses you have. What we look at is what are some of your other community assets? What are your nonprofit organizations? What are your religious organizations? What kinds of public utilities and amenities do you have here? That can even include festivals. It can include activities. And we kind of go through this whole little exercise I'll take you through where we outline what your assets are. And what you'll start to see is things just really kind of all pop out. And those are the things that you'll want to start building upon. Or if there's something where you have a big gap or a hole, that would be something you'd want to talk about bringing in. So that's usually the first session. It's kind of simple, but it really gets the dialogue going, and that's why it's important to have a very diverse stakeholder team, because you want all elements of the community participating. And then we go into what's called visioning. We look at where you're at, where you've been, where you want to go. And we'll actually create, I know this sounds corny, but it's really kind of fun. We create a vision statement for your community. And once we do that vision statement, and once you guys all kind of agree on that, and this really does take the longest time because it's hard to agree on one vision statement. Once you guys agree upon that, we use that vision statement through the rest of the facilitative sessions. And what I'll train you how to do is use that vision statement in every development decision you have to make moving forward. So once we do that asset inventory, once we have a basic understanding of who lives in Hooper and what your composition is made of, we come to that vision statement. And then every decision as it relates to your growth and your sustainability, your current, future growth, all of those really hard decisions, particularly the decisions that the council and the planning commission have to make, those are all going to be based in this overall vision of what Hooper envisions itself to be now and in the future. So once we get through that visioning session, then we start getting into the real meat of learning how to do development projects. It's an art, and it's a learned art. It's not something that we're born natural to do. It's not something that you can really just go take a class in. You really have to get in and get your hands dirty to learn how to do real sustainable development projects. And that's why we start with a vision. So we'll take that vision statement, and then we'll start looking at your actual city, the actual layout of your city, and we'll look at your general plan, we'll look at your land use plan, and we'll start identifying areas of potential economic development. And that doesn't mean that it has to be just your standard development. It can be really creative. We can talk about really creative ways to bring economy into your environment. It could be something like a tourism attraction. It could be something like commercial development. It's going to have to fit the vision. And that's what it comes down to, is identifying potential properties that we can look at and start recruiting potential economic drivers onto those properties. And then after we do that, I will give you a crash course on how you actually do a real development project, start to finish, from design to funding to implementation to maintenance. And that's usually the fourth session. All the sessions last around 2 hours, and by that fourth session, we're going to have a project list that's prioritized. This is our number one project. This is what we want to go after. This is what we want to recruit. This is what we want to go after funding for. This is how we want this to look. And then I'll teach you that process of going through the design, the funding, and the implementation of an actual economic development project. Once again, I'm here to facilitate and train. I'm not here to tell you what projects you should be doing or even how to rank your projects, because we will go through a ranking process. That's going to be up to the stakeholder team. But that's what you're looking at if you want to do these types of sessions with me. I'm happy to do that. Like I said, I usually do one a month, and they're about 2 hours each. So within a period of 4 to 6 months, you guys should have an actual plan that says, this is our vision, this is what we want in our community, and this is how we're going to go about getting it. Thoughts, questions, comments?
So, thank you. I can be pretty loud. Hey,
I don't even need it really.
a lot of what you're saying sounds very similar to what the city went through a few years ago for the general plan. I mean, there were all kinds of surveys done, there were open houses done, there was a lot of legwork put in. So is this meant to replicate that? Is this meant to kind of get a baseline if everybody still feels that way? What's the purpose of basically going down that same path again?
So the purpose of it is not so much to review your general plan, but to look at your general plan and figure out the best way to implement it in the shortest period of time and the least amount of expense.
Okay,
And the way to capitalize on your general plan.
perfect. Thank you.
But to also tie in a vision into that. So, and there might be, I haven't read through your general plan, there might be components of that that we just pull out when we do the visioning session. Same thing with the land use exercise, there'll be definitely components of the general plan that we'll use. But the idea is to take what you've already done and just build it up bigger.
Perfect.
And put it into action.
Yeah.
A lot of people do general plans, and what do? They sit on
I
shelves.
think if you don't have them, the mic, they can't hear
Oh,
them.
sorry.
Is that right?
Okay. Sorry.
Really?
That's my fault.
Yes, no.
Right here,
A lot of times you'll do a general plan and they'll sit on the shelf. So what we want to do is get that general plan out, dust it off, and if we need to kind of grow it a little bit bigger or make some changes to it, not that we're changing your general plan, we're just looking at it from more of a strategic aspect of it and more of a visioning aspect of it.
Well, several years have gone by, so, and things have changed, so maybe just that kind of a.
I mean, if it comes down to it where that's the direction that this stakeholder team wants to go in, that they want to do some amendments to that, that's up to you guys, but I'm here to help you implement that.
So if we want Project X, whatever that is, do we use your contact? Do we have to go out and actively recruit those, or do you have contacts in different areas of, developers that do this, that specialize in different categories, different commercial types?
So I'm going to take you to the point where you should be able to be autonomous, but as the County Economic Development Director, if you ask my assistance, I'm not going to say no. I will always be here to help. But the idea is to train you, how to fish. And that's what I'm doing. I'm going to be training you how some of the best practices. I've been doing economic development for over 20 years, and from tiny cities all the way up to regions and on the state level. So I'm here to just share best practices and kind of direct you on some key economic development principles that will help you get your general plan active and going, and get some economy and some economic drivers inside your city, which are really desperately needed. So, but if it comes down to it where you have a very specific plan that you want, or a specific type of business that you want, I have a lot of resources and I'm always here to help.
So I have a second question, and I'll explain why I have this question. How tied is Weaver County economic development to the state economic development? And the reason I ask that question is Governor Cox tried to push something through this year that was pretty hot and heavy, to where they could go into cities or parcels of land and
Oh, it went
force
through.
development.
It went through.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is concerning to me, that the
It should
state
be
would
concerning to
come in
everybody.
anywhere and force that.
And I'll keep the politics out of it. I do all the government relations for the county.
Sure.
And we fought very heavily against, are you talking about 249?
Yes.
And 327. 327, yeah. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not happy about, none of us are happy about that. No one in state economic development is happy about that. We had a huge text thread going up until 1 o'clock on last Friday night. It was ugly, but it happened, and we're gonna work with it and around it. I would say that for the majority of what we're doing in Weaver County, they're not gonna be interested. we're gonna just keep moving forward until someone,
Well, I think they are, and not to be argumentative, but they are interested, because when you look at western Weber County out on 12th Street, 900 acres of economic development that's coming out there, and that's being pushed pretty heavily by the county commission,
are you talking about
the inland port, or whatever.
yeah,
they
so
call it.
we're kind of, actually, because the inland port is there,
Yeah,
and we took those measures, we're actually protected.
okay.
Yeah, so that's the only reason I'm not completely freaking out about 249. But, yes, valid point, but yeah, you guys will be fine. Unless you want to build a nuclear facility.
We've got the island. We can put it on the island.
And if you do, I will show you how to do it. I will teach you how to build a nuclear facility if that's what you want to do.
Would you mind just saying those bills that you were referencing?
Oh, 249, and 327.
327.
Yeah. Yeah, they were a little overreaching.
I was thinking of 337, so I'm just not familiar with these two, so I just wanted to.
Yeah, check them out. They're not going to make you happy.
No way.
337.
So that's really that in a nutshell. Happy to work with you guys. Once again, it's more of a commitment on your part. I'm here to facilitate and help train. We can even cut it down smaller if you just want to learn how to just do development projects. We can make it that simple. But if you want to deep dive into the vision and into your general plan and figure out how to take that general plan and implement it, happy to help you with that. So, okay. Well, the one last thing I wanted to present to you are the two tools that we use on the county level as it relates to development finance, and wanted to go through a quick presentation and jump in and ask me questions. Feel free to interrupt as I go. These are complicated. They're not easy to understand. I mean, we still, every time we do one of these, we still, have to sit around the table and go through the state statute because they're a little bit complicated, but they can be really beneficial. So,
That should be working now.
no, I'm just doing it wrong. It's working. It's just me. I'm left-handed. I do everything backwards. So let's talk a little bit public infrastructure districts. County uses this tool a lot, and it's got some really good pros. And I'll talk a little bit about the cons. I will always be open and honest with you. I will never sugarcoat anything. So public infrastructure districts are governed by state statute, and I can send this to you guys too. You have this presentation. So they're basically an opportunity for a county or a city to partner with a developer or a development project that needs significant infrastructure. And I'll give you an example of one that we're doing right now. They're governed by state statute, so it all comes down from the state level. They're financing tools, that's all they are. They sound scary because you actually created a local district, but it's not in perpetuity like a normal local district or like a special service district. They have a termination date. The one cool thing about PIDs is that they require 100% participation of the proposed district property owners, and I'll explain why in just a second. And they really are local districts. Here's what's great about PIDs. The city or the county that creates them is never on the hook for the bonds. Their taxpayers are not on the hook for the bonds. The cities and counties are not on the hook for the bonds. It is literally the public infrastructure district. And that's why it requires 100% participation. So what will happen is you'll have a project come to you and they'll want to do a PID, and it's only on the parcels that are going to be in the project area. It's similar to a CRA in that regard, but it's totally different than a CRA. So once everyone agrees that they're going to get created, the city or the county can create these districts. Well, maybe not, Malcolm. All right, I'll just next slide. Can you next slide me?
You got it, you're back, sorry.
Oh, I'm back? Okay.
We had someone jump on Zoom, one of our
Oh.
planning commissioners, sorry.
But here's what they're really great for. They're used to improve public amenities. So say you've got a project going and it ran out of financing. Parks, public transportation and community centers, trails, sewer, water, infrastructure, and they're just used to finance the projects. Once it's financed, once the bonds are paid off, we're done. And they go away. And you can use them for all kinds of stuff. Even outside, you can actually use them outside the parcels that are being utilized. So I'll give you an example of how we're doing that in our West River corridor. But they're really set up to target infrastructure. So say you have a really cool project that wants to come in. And the developer's like, I'd love to come in, but I don't have a sewer connection. And this is what we have going on our West River corridor. So we had a developer come in, they got 350 acres, and we put them in a PID. So what we did as the county, we said, we'll create this PID for you, but you're gonna put in a park, you're gonna put in a water tower, and not just for your project, you're gonna put in a regional water tower, you're gonna put in a regional sewer and lift station line, and you're gonna do all these road improvements on the public right of way. Then we'll create the PID for you. So we put that in their development agreement. Once the development agreement is passed through our planning commission and passed through our commissioners, then that comes to my committee, and we look over the development agreement, we look over the proposal for the PID, and then we make a recommendation to the commissioners, and then the commissioners create the PID. Once the PID is created, then the PID is independent of the county. It's their own district. They go to the bond market. They take out the revenue bonds. They literally tax themselves an extra millage rate onto their property to pay off those bonds. Does that make sense? So, county's not on the hook, just PID.
So in comparison, when we look at a CRA, we have to go to all the different taxing entities and say, hey, are you willing to give up?
Correct.
PID, this actually goes out to the bond market, and whoever the developer is on the hook for all of that?
100%. And the property owners that are in the PID. That's why
Yeah.
they have that additional, so what's unique about PIDs is that each city or county can create their own policy. So you look at the state statute, you can create your own policy. Like in our county, if the state allows you to take out 15 mills on your property, that's insane in my opinion. Our county says 5. That's your max. You can't go higher than 5. You can't tax yourself higher than 5. And you gotta realize they're taxing themselves to pay for this public infrastructure. So and you're like, why would anyone do that? Like, that doesn't make sense. Well, it does, because they go to the bond market and they get tax exempt bonds. And they're able to get that money up front. Sometimes, in the instance of this particular one we have in the West River corridor, with the sewer line, we'll be doing a pioneering agreement with them. So that will go back to help pay off the bonds too. So as other businesses connect, that pioneering agreement will kick in and will help pay those bonds off, because it's really large public infrastructure, and they're having to go to the bond market for millions and millions of dollars. So this is a really safe incentive to do with your developers if you are in need of massive infrastructure for development to come in.
Isn't the developer just gonna pass that on to the individual property owners or you know what I mean? So
They can't, if they're housing developers, yes, but we do, most of ours are industrial, and we will do housing. We're open to that. But there's disclosure that it has to be disclosed to the future property owners.
What's the difference between that and the developer saying, hey, I got a 30 lot subdivision and he just passes on the cost anyway? It's the same. I mean, if I'm gonna go buy a lot in
Because as a developer, you wouldn't be able to get the tax exempt bonding. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So really the only benefit is the tax exempt bond.
Yes, and you can usually get a better interest rate because it's backed off of a tax millage, a tax leverage. Does that make sense? Yeah, so they're basically junk bonds, to be honest with you. And there's a lot of investors that are interested in that because they're backed by an additional tax millage on the property. But you're correct about that. The property owners that come in, if you're doing a housing subdivision and they come in they're gonna have that disclosed to them, that there is an additional mill on their property until the infrastructure is paid off.
So if this is considered a separate district, who has jurisdiction over this in the long run? Like,
Oh,
is
great
the
question.
city, like, taking care of
That's a great question.
maintenance and things and public safety, all that kind of stuff?
Yes, absolutely. No, great question. I was gonna go there, and thank you for bringing that up. So, in your governing document, which has to be created, I think that's like one of the next slides, when you're doing these PIDs, oh, nope, I took that slide out. In your governing document, so before you create one, you create a governing document. In the governing document, it will list where the assets that are created by the PID have to go. And those have to be done through intergovernmental agreement. So the county requires some type of documentation that the PID goes to the sewer district, goes to the county, and says, okay, we're gonna build this, because they can't own it. They can only pay for it and build it. And so they'll have to say, well, in the case of like this PID out in the West Beaver corridor, that sewer is gonna go to the LMSA district that I manage. The roads will go to the county. The water tower will go to the water district. The park that they're donating will go to the park. So yes, they have to put all of those agreements in place and before they can go to the bond market.
So is the city involved at all? Is it considered like if Hooper did that, would it be part of Hooper City? Who would be responsible for the maintenance on that infrastructure that goes in?
If the city agreed to take it, and the governing body, there has to be a governing body, whether it be a park district, a sewer district, a municipality, a county, yes, you would agree that you would take it, own it, and maintain it in perpetuity.
So it's not considered to be part of Hooper City, or it's its own little?
No, the PID, think of it like this, it's just a finance tool. Once the infrastructure is created, it goes to the entities that normally would manage that infrastructure. But you have to enter into an agreement. Like I said, these are a little bit complicated, they're kind of weird to wrap your head around. But yeah, think of it like this. So say I was a developer and I went and I created PID with Hooper City. And I was like, okay, great, I'm gonna build this road to connect into your main road or whatever. I'm gonna build this sewer, I'm gonna put this park inside this, and then whatever else I agree to, trails, whatever. Well, I'm gonna get with the park district. And I'll be like, hey, will you take this park once I build it? And then we'll put an intergovernmental agreement together. And we'll do that with the park. Then I get with the city and I'm like, okay, will you guys take the roads and the sewer? Because you guys have a sewer district. And then I would get with whoever else, But once that's done, then they can go to the bond market. They cannot go to the bond market until they have those intergovernmental agreements put in place, saying who is going to own and operate that. And then part of that agreement also is that it has to meet city code, state code, all the codes. It never supersedes any codes. So think of it just kind of as a way to upfront finance infrastructure and put the burden onto the developer. But yes, you would want to take that into consideration before you sign your agreement saying, yeah, we'll create this PID, but with the understanding that you'll take all that infrastructure, which is why you do a development agreement before you create a PID. So you do that development agreement with the developer before you even started creating the PID. That way there's already an expectation of what the city and what the other districts would be taking.
I just have one question.
Yeah.
Just from the screen before, I just want to make sure I understand that who's actually responsible for this debt is the property owners within that district. That's who's really responsible for the debt.
Correct, and that's why you have to have 100% sign off to create one of these.
So you have to send something like a
It's
petition?
a petition, that's exactly what it is, yeah. But usually in the case of, like we do these for industrial development, so you're gonna have one or two people that has to sign this. With the housing projects, we haven't done a housing project yet. And once again, I'm very candid about these things. I'm not a fan of using these for housing projects because you'll have the developer come, they own the property. And as they're developing that property out, what are they doing with it? Subdividing it and selling it. It falls falls onto. So you'll have a whole subdivision of people paying an extra 5 mils on their property, and across the street, those people aren't paying anything, but yet they're using the water, the sewer, the streets, the parks. So that's where they get controversial, is with housing. But they're really great tools for commercial and industrial development, because those tend to stay with the developer, tends to keep those.
Well, I got a question for you.
Mhm.
So, I know that the freeway's gonna be coming in, right? The
West Davis.
West Davis corridor. And I take it all the time, but, would that be something that this would be used for, or?
No, because that's a UDOT
And I just,
project.
I don't know what's
Yeah.
going on, so I don't know, so
I would say no, that would be a UDOT project. What you would use this for, and you wouldn't use it necessarily for,
Or use it for like 5,500.
But if we knew where that was coming in and we wanted to
connect,
connect,
yes.
or let's say put a commercial area by an exit.
Yep.
But we need infrastructure.
I would put that in your development agreement and create a PID and let the developers
There you
pay
go.
for that.
I'm glad I brought that up.
We never already covered this, but who would be the entities participating? Can you just?
In the PID,
Yeah.
so the city is the,
Whoever owns it, still the, anyway, go ahead.
yeah, the city creates it.
Okay.
And then they put their governing document in place, they put their development agreement in place, and then they create it. Then they step back. And the people that have to manage it and build the infrastructure are the PID board members. They generally are the people that own the property. That tends to be who's on the board. And like with Weaver County, we appoint board members to that, but they have to be proper. They have to be part of the property ownership.
But what was I saying? What she did say is like, everybody has to sign off, so if it's through, maybe 5 people's land, like, I don't know, I apologize, I don't know, but, then it's only 5 people that have to sign off.
Correct.
And then the city doesn't have to come up with that money right away. I just wanted to.
So for property tax, there'd be a line item that said PID or something.
And I'll have additional 5 mils. Or whatever you guys agree on, whatever the city agrees on.
So, you can nod along and tell
These
me.
are good questions, guys.
You can nod along and tell me if I'm correct here, or completely off base. So if we have a piece of property and the property developer is trying to push for a CRA, because that incremental goes to all these county entities, that, if you go the PID route, all your infrastructure still gets built, but they're gonna pay a little bit extra on the developer side. Where does that incremental go? Does that go to the original agencies again? From day one? So
Yeah.
if Hooper
It
City
doesn't touch
were to
the
do something
increment. The
like that,
PIDs do not touch the increment.
so where with a CRA, you could be deferred for 20 years, PID you're collecting day one.
And if you do pioneering agreements, sometimes you get those bonds paid off quicker. So in the case of a housing developer, and I'll talk a tiny bit about IFDs, which will address what you were bringing up. In the case of a housing developer, if you're savvy enough, you can get those PID bonds paid off quicker than and not have that burden fall onto the housing. The new property owners of the housing as you're selling off your property, selling off the subdivisions. I know it's really complicated. I'm going to talk about CRAs. You can marry a CRA to a PID legally.
That sounds like algebra.
I'll get to that in just a little bit once we're done with PIDs.
You may get to this eventually, so I was gonna ask, why would the city not want to do a PID? What are the negatives? to this?
I would say I think there's 2 negatives. One is what he brought up with the housing, and it does add an additional millage rate onto an existing subdivision, and they are literally paying for infrastructure that everyone in the city gets to use. That can seem unfair. Just optically, it can seem unfair.
Because isn't that what Marriott Sladeville did right off of 12th Street with the recent housing development?
Oh no, that's a whole different thing what they did. We're not going to talk about that.
That's a mess. That's not a mess.
That was not a PID. That, and if for some crazy reason the PID was not able to pay off their bonds, say the whole thing like crashed and burned, nobody's on the hook. It just looks ugly, like you have a half of development done. Does that make sense? So the only risk the city takes is optically. And that's something you gotta weigh out, but you can control a lot of that through your governing document and through your development agreement. So, these are here to, this is what I say about incentives. Whenever you're dealing with developers, and whenever you're dealing with really large scale development projects, if a developer is coming to you and they're coming out of the gate asking for incentive money, that's a red flag. Incentives make a good project better. Does that make sense? They don't make, a lot of times you'll hear this word but for. Well, you know what? I tell cities all the time that I work with, you're never desperate. So if someone's coming out of the gate saying, if you guys don't give us an incentive, we can't do this project. Okay. Then we'll wait till somebody can. But incentives are a good partnership between a city and a developer, and they make a good project, a really good project that's going to be beneficial. They're going to make that project better.
And this is what you're talking
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with infrastructure issues, which you guys have. You guys have infrastructure issues. So this is a good mechanism to consider as you're getting projects pitched to you, and to say, and to look at the numbers, and to look at, and that's why we always talk about, when we get into actually talking about how you do a development project from vision to maintenance, I'll go over all the different talking points and the processes that you would go through to make sure that you're what we call do your due diligence, so that when you get to this negotiation phase, it's a no-brainer. You'll know right up front whether or not you should be getting in bed with the developer. So, any more questions about PADs? I know they're complicated and I gave you like the super quick and dirty on these, but they are really great mechanisms for the right project. And they open up opportunities for other developers to come in and connect into that new infrastructure.
Is that what the pioneering agreement is?
Yes.
So if I develop and I've got a PID on my property and Malcolm wants to do something across the street, I can basically sell him part of my PID.
You can't
For
sell
lack
one
of
PAD,
a better
but
term.
I want to say pioneer agreement. Think of it in terms of impact fees. So
Okay.
say that you create a sewer line and you guys have your own sewer district in the city. So that sewer district would assume that line. Well, as other projects are coming in and connect into that line, you would have an impact fee that the district would charge, and they would give some of that back to the PID to help pay the bonds off. Yeah. So it's a good partnership. It's a good way to partnership and to get needed infrastructure paid for up front, and then you kind of deal with it on the back end paying it off. Now I'm going to talk really quickly about IFDs, which are not on my presentation, but they are a reality, and they were passed in the legislature last session. IFDs are what we call the stepbrother of PIDs.
IFD?
Infrastructure finance districts. They're really strange. So the legislature passed these last year, don't know why, but we're seeing them pop up in the county all the time. An IFD is the same thing from a finance perspective as a PID. The developer can go to the bond market and get tax-exempt bonding for their project, for infrastructure. They do not go through the city or the county to do that. They do not set up a governing document. They just do it. They create them. They can even create one and you wouldn't even know, because they create them at the county level. We don't know, except for the fact that we've told our clerk, if they come in and create one, we want to know. So it's a strange thing. They have one caveat that's a little bit different than this as it relates to the bond. The bonds have to be paid off before you get certificates of occupancy. Does that make sense? So that addresses that issue, so that bond financing is not passed on to the homeowner if it's a housing project. So that's one benefit of them, but the other benefit of them is that I would say it's not a benefit. The other aspect is that they don't require the governing municipal body to participate in them. And I have a little bit of heartburn about that sometimes. They do have to follow city and county code. They have to follow the entitlement process, so that's good. But it's a way for the developers to go and just get a bunch of tax exempt bonds, pay for their development project infrastructure, pay that off before they start selling their houses. So
So it's a tax loophole.
it is a tax loophole.
And you know exactly why they passed it, they're all developers.
Well, of course. Of course. Anyway, so that one went through. You do need to be aware of it. What was that?
What number was that?
Oh God, that was last year. I can't
Oh,
remember. I'm
okay.
sorry.
Yeah.
I just can't remember.
No.
I have to really think about it. But if you Google infrastructure finance district, it'll pop up. But we're seeing a lot more of those. We've got 3 in the county right now, and there's a couple in some of the cities that have popped up this past year. Okay,
So
let's.
on those IFDs, the city would have no say.
You may not even know.
Of the infrastructure size or code and things like that, or are they still?
Yes, they're required to go through the planning commission. They're required to go through the entitlement process and adhere to city and county codes. Yes, and any standards, state standards, or EPA or whatever. So they are governed by that, but you don't have a say in whether or not they're created. They can go create their own district.
Well, that's what I'm confused on, if it's their own special, separate district.
How do they legally do it?
Well, and who has jurisdiction over, if we don't have a lot of say in what's happening there, then how does Hooper City have any control over what that special district is doing?
You have, the only say you have over it is your development code. So they can't work outside your development code, and then you don't have to give them certificates of occupancy till they can prove that they paid their bonds off. Other than that, it's just a way for them to go to the bond market and get tax exempt bonds.
So they could go in and get these bonds, and then if something happened where the project fell through, is the city left, I mean,
Not at all.
financially responsible, but
No, so these types of bonds are, they're revenue bonds, but they're really junk bonds, which means I'm an investor, I'm gonna go buy these bonds. If they fail, I just lost a bunch of money. But if they succeed, I get a bunch of dividends. So, yeah, that's why but it's like any project though, you can have any project come in and start and then not finish and just leave you with a big eyesore. It's just when
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
but in those cases, you can be like, well, that was the developer's fault. But in the PID case, it's kind of like, well, they had public infrastructure involved in it also, it's kind of our fault too. So there could be some optics. You could just have to be savvy with your development agreements. That's really what the main takeaway from these are, is be savvy with your development agreement. Tell them, we'll do this, but we want X, Y, Z. And we want it like this, and we want it given to us in this condition. So you put that in your governing document. So you have a development agreement and a governing document. So you have full control over that.
But both of these address the issue of the city has infrastructure needs that they can't meet by themselves.
Yep.
One developer gets an exorbitant amount that doesn't make the project feasible for his number of commercial or homes.
Yeah.
And it's a way for him to go to the bond market without the city being on the hook for any of those bonds.
Yeah, and you guys, and I'm sure, Mayor, you guys know what it's like to go through a general obligation bond election, right? That's no fun. So this is a way to get projects that are mutually beneficial to the city and the community moving without having to go through a lot of red tape. And the liability is on the developer, not the city. And that's why I love these. I love PIDs. We use PIDs all the time, but once again, it took us a year to get really savvy on putting these development agreements together and putting the governing documents together. And that's something, if you decide that's a route you want to go down, we're happy to share all of our share our policies, our procedures, all of it with you, because we have one of the best ones in the state. Our bond attorneys wrote this legislation. We work with them, they're our general counsel. Actually, I just was working with Senator Stevenson, and we did a little bit of tweaking to the PID legislation this past session to give it a little more strength as it relates to the cities and the counties. So it's still being refined, and it's a new incentive, but there's ways to control it, and that's the most important thing you guys need to know, is that you can have full control. Other than the interest rates and how much they go to the bond market for, that's up to them. want to move on to CRAs? Okay. CRAs you guys are somewhat familiar with because you've had a couple presentations on those. Tax increment finance has been around forever and ever and ever. It's used totally differently in every state that I've lived in or worked in. In the state of Georgia, they have a lot more restrictions than they do in the state of Utah. The state of Utah is pretty loose about this incentive. One of the things the county did back in January, we worked on this for over a year, we tightened up our policy. So we took the state statute and we said, all right, that's fine and dandy, but guess what we're going to do? We're going to tighten it up. So we tightened our policy. We're very conservative with how we do it because in the past, the county was not. And to the tune of about $550 million. Yeah. They can be abused. So, let's talk about how they can be used effectively. So once again, governed by state statute, but you still have some local control. It's another public finance method, tool. And what it does is it redirects that future property tax. So you guys will always get your base tax, which is unfortunately very small to begin with. But you'll always get your base tax. Where we start the negotiation is on that increment. So if you have a project that comes, so you won't be able to do tax increment finance if you don't have a project. That's just, just doesn't exist. So you have a project come in, the city will keep its base tax line forever and ever and ever. It's never touched. It's the increment. So as the project is going in, it's the property value is going up and the personal property value is going up on that project. That's the increment. So what we do is we come in and we do this negotiation where we redirect future property tax revenues back into the project area. So we create a project area, and that is a process, and that goes to the Community Investment Agency. So it creates a project area to utilize property tax increment financing. CRAs can also do a lot of other stuff. We're just talking about property tax increment tonight. But if Hooper created a CRA, a Community Reinvestment Agency, not a project area, just the agency, they have a lot of state-granted powers. The CRA has the ability to buy and sell properties. These are just a tiny sliver of what you guys can do. You could buy and sell properties. So as a city, you have to go through a lot of statutorial hoops to buy and sell property. As a CRA, you do not. You can hire a director. You can take grant funding. A CRA is like an authority, is like a development authority. So it has a lot of opportunities to leverage deals. But your project area is what we want to talk about tonight. So CRA, you might hear the term RDA2, that was changed on the state level I think 2016. So it gets confusing because you have a Community Reinvestment Agency, which is the elected body of Hooper. In our case, it's the 3 commissioners. They have to take off their commission hat and put on their CRA hat when they're doing business. So those meetings are all done very separately and they're not mixed together. They have to be done separately. So they're political subdivisions of the state. When we're talking about the actual areas, the project areas, they're created by the legislative body of a county or a city for the purpose of stimulating redevelopment and assisting with infrastructure. So a lot of cities, and this makes sense for a city more so than a county, a lot of cities will go in and say, okay, we're going to create this CRA, and they just designate the area, go through the legal process of creating a project area in advance of a project actually happening. I don't like that for the county because it's not, we deal with it on a project by project basis. But a lot of the cities in our county have come in and created their own, particularly Ogden, like almost every block in Ogden is an CRA. You can do that if you want. It's a lot of work. I would recommend that you wait till you actually have a project and a specific project area before you go through the process of doing that. Because your project, the way that you want to structure your incentive is going to be based on the project that you're going to be having in that area. Whereas instead of just saying, well, in future we'd like to see this, so we're just gonna make this area. That doesn't make any sense, because you wanna be able to really leverage that tax increment to the best of your ability. And you can't do that if you don't have a pending project. That's just my thought process. It may not work the same for every city or every county, but that's how it works in my brain. And we've set our policy up to do that. We basically have said, you want us to create a CRA in the county, bring us a project. And then we're gonna assess that project financially, and we're gonna see where we call the delta. Where's your delta? And we're gonna specifically look at your infrastructure delta. Great, you wanna come and be here? That's fantastic. We're glad to have you. You want some of your tax increment back? Great. Well, what are you gonna use it for? And in our policy with the county, it is very specific what you can use that tax increment for. State, not so much. The state actually kind of leaves it up to the city or the county to decide what they want to do. So you literally can take tax increment and say, hey, Mr. Developer, we really want you here. You, nobody else. And we don't want you going over to West Haven. We want you here in Hooper. We're going to give you as an incentive for your own pocket an extra 10 or 15%, or in some cases 50 to 75%. So that's allowed. It's not illegal. Is it a best practice? Heck no. No, it's not a best practice. But what we like to do is like, hey, Mr. Incentive, Mr. Developer, we're glad you're here. It looks like you need a new gas line that goes to your development project. And it looks like you're going to have to put in a little more infrastructure than what you thought you were going to have to put in because we want it. So we're willing to give you 50% of that tax increment back, but you have to show me at the end of each year that you put it back into infrastructure. That's what we require on the on the county level. So we're really savvy about how we do our tax increment. We haven't been in the past, and I'm just going to be honest. And to the tune of $550 million. Yeah, exactly. So your governing board of the CRA is the current members of the legislative body, so that would be your mayor and council. And once again, you guys have to say, here's another thing too. You don't ever have to do these incentives. So if you have a developer that is pretty much demanding it, you don't have to. This is up to the city council and the mayor if they want to do these. So the CRAs administer the tax increment, so you make the deal. The CRA board makes the deal. They create a project area, and that is adoption through a resolution. If you've never done one before, happy to share the process. It's complicated, and it's a big public process that has a lot of steps. We actually have a lawsuit against us for one I created recently. It's just complete misunderstanding, but they're easily misunderstood, and the community members where we created it were really upset about it, Ogden Valley, and we're going through a process of explaining to them we did not break the law, we actually did it correctly, but it's a complicated process, not kidding. So we're always happy. I said that after I just told you we're getting sued, but we really do know what we're doing. Always happy to share our process with you. Under the current statute, the CRA negotiates the amount of foregone tax increment through interlocal agreements. This is what you were talking about, Travis, with each taxing entity. So I have to go, when we create a CRA, I have to go to the school district. And this is another reason why I don't just create crazy areas. Because I have to go to the school district, the fire district, sometimes the water district, sometimes the sewer district, depending on the deal we're trying to make, and I have to go negotiate for their tax increment. So I go and say, hey, guess what, we got this great project, it's gonna bring in this amount of jobs, it needs this infrastructure lift, and it's gonna bring in this amount of capital expenditure. This is what you guys are gonna get. This is what you're currently getting without the project, and then this is what you're gonna get with the project. And then we'll say, we're asking for, our districts around here only do 50% for 10 to 15 years. So we don't even go in more than that. And so I'll ask for that. And we have to go through their board processes. It's a long, drawn out process. So you gotta be really serious if you're gonna be doing these because they're very complicated and they're laborious. So the CRA, and in this case, I represent the CRA for the county. I go and negotiate the amount of the tax with the different taxing entities. And sometimes I don't get it. Sometimes they say no and I have to come back and we have to renegotiate. And I have been turned down. Taxing entities involved could include the county, the school district, and the fire district. So in the case of a city creating a CRA, you have to get the county, because we manage your property tax. You have to get the county to participate. And we're not gonna participate if you don't have the city, if you don't have the school district. Because they get the majority of the taxes in the county. So that's one of our requirements. So if you guys want to create a CRA, you would have to go to the school district first and say, and then the school district's gonna ask you what? Have you talked to the county yet? So what I tend to do with cities is if you're gonna create a CRA, come let me know. We'll put you through our process and we'll take you to the point where I will go with you to the school district and say, the county is supporting this, we haven't voted on it yet, because our CRA won't vote on it until the school district votes on it. I know, this whole thing gets really crazy. But I just want to give you a heads up, they're laborious, they take time, but they're great, and they're a great tool. This is the uses of the TIF with the state statute. 87% of that increment goes to your redevelopment area. 10% has to go to housing, affordable housing, that's a state mandate, and then 3% goes to administration. That's a county, that goes to the county. Because we administer your CRA.
Is there time involved as far as years that this has to be, like, is it a 10-year?
That's
15?
negotiable, all of that's negotiable. So I'll just tell you, the school district and the fire district, they have a policy of 50 years, oh my gosh, 50% at 10 to 15 years. So does the county. We do 50% at 15 years. If you can show us that you need that extra infrastructure lift, and I'll just use your lift station as an example. So we would entertain if you guys came to the county and said, truly, we're going to be using this money for this lift station. I would go to the commission and say, let's give Hooper a bump. Let's bump them up to 75 to get that lift station in. So that's all negotiable. But there are policies that kind of dictate where to start. And this is just kind of a visual. So you've got your baseline, you always have that, and then your project begins and your increment starts accruing. And your increment's rebated. So the project area pays their taxes to the county, then we cut a rebate check directly to the city CRA. So it doesn't go to the developer, it goes to the city CRA, then you guys disperse it how you need to disperse it, whatever deal you've made with the developer. So once again, the CRA has a lot of power, and you maintain that power, the city maintains that power.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand, so upfront, when all of that infrastructure goes in, the developer pays for, is this something that we have to work out as a city, is who pays for the cost upfront, or I'm confused when the funds come into play?
So this is why, okay, so let me also throw this in. You can marry a CRA and a PID. So they would go to the bond market. The developer would to pay for the infrastructure out of those bond funds. There's that additional millage rate that's on the property to pay off that bond. You can also say, we'll give you some CRA money, some tax increment finance, but you're gonna have to use that to pay off your bond too. So tax increment finance can be used to pay off PID bonds. Nowhere, unless you put that in your development agreement, should the city be funding anything.
So if they don't do the bonds, who pays for it upfront? Who pays for that infrastructure when it goes in?
That's up to your development agreement.
You could say, look, developer, you pay all of this, once it's in and we start gaining tax value.
You could pioneer that back.
You can,
Yeah, you can pioneer it.
And the money comes in and we give that to the developer for 15 years.
Or if you guys set this is about the PIDs, because the PID is a board and it's a district, and if you're gonna dedicate tax increment to that, I wanna make sure it's going to the PID bond, not the developer's pocket. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but if you don't have a PID and you're just doing CRA CRA, that could, unless you have something in your CRA agreement, which you can create, or your CRA policy, which you can also create a CRA policy. Our policy says, I'll use Ogden City as an example, we just did an amendment with them. And we said, yeah, we're gonna give you we're gonna bump up the money we said we were gonna give you for the airport. At the end of the year, you're gonna have to show us where you took our tax dollars that we're giving you and you paid for infrastructure. Like, they have to physically show us a receipt. So you can put that in your agreement. So you'll do an interlocal agreement with each of the districts. So, and I'll tell you this, if we came in and participated in a CRA with you, that's gonna be in your interlocal agreement with us. I'm gonna say, great, Hooper, we're happy to give you, this percentage, which is equal to like 4 million or whatever. But at the end of each year, you're gonna have to show me that that's what you used for infrastructure. So it's there's an accountability piece, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
I think so. When you guys, the increment is based on what you're assuming is gonna be the value.
Yeah.
But if that value isn't there, what if something happens for some
Yeah.
reason value's tanked?
Then they
That
still
money's
need-
not generated.
Correct. Then, yeah, the developer is gonna be on the hook for that, because it's their project, ultimately. And depending on what you put in your development agreement that they have to put in as it relates to infrastructure, that's where your development agreement is so important. Like, from a planning and zoning and city planning perspective, your development agreement is your governing document over every project. And we'll talk about that when we start going through, this is how you do a project correctly. Your development agreement really is the key to getting what you want and holding that developer accountable. The county even puts things in like escrow accounts in their development agreement. It's like, well, you're going to have to put an escrow account of $1 million on this, if that's really what you're going to do. We actually do that. We require the developers to throw money down into an escrow account in case they bailed out, and we had to go and clean the site up or something. So there's ways to leverage that.
So with the PID, I see a bigger upside for a city because you're still collecting
Agreed.
revenues from day one.
Agreed.
And I can see where a developer would want as much, because now they're levied an extra tax, whether it's tax-free or not, on their income
Yeah.
tax. What would be the benefit to a city of using a CRA? I guess I could see if there were multiple property owners, like downtown Ogden, if you've got a 12-block radius.
Sure.
You're trying to buy up properties and redevelop them and do all that stuff. I can see that being beneficial, but for an empty chunk of ground,
So Hooper, where it's beneficial for Hooper,
yeah.
you guys are going to get that baseline value, which is not very much, always. That tax increment, you're not going to get any of that unless you negotiate it. So that's coming from the school district, the fire district, the county. We're getting a big chunk of your property, of that development project. We're getting the lion's share of that property, of that development project. Does that make sense? You guys aren't. Your tax rate in your city is so low that you can bring in a really great development project, but it's still not going to be close to what the county and the school district's going to get.
With a CRA,
The
with a
CRA.
PID.
The PID, it's different,
With a
because
PID.
you aren't losing anything. And if you just did a PID, you would get 100% of that increment. So, of your increment, not the county, not the city, not this.
No,
I mean,
like
I'm
you
sorry,
said,
not the school district.
But the taxing entities like the district and the fire and everything, they would rather do the PID as well, because they don't have to give up that tax.
Yes and no. So, I know.
You're making this hard.
I know, sorry, you guys.
No, it's
I
good.
told you,
It's
I
good
warned
work.
you, these are complicated. They're complicated incentives. But if you structure them right, they're really beneficial. So, in unincorporated Weber County, we have a lot of greenbelt property. You know what that means? I've got properties that are like 500 and 600 acres that pay $1,300 a year. So that's my baseline. Yuck. I'm bringing in a data center right now that's a $4 billion project on a greenbelt property
Where at?
out in the West River corridor, off of 12th Street. Wrap your head around that tax increment. And you think I'm okay with giving away a portion of that? Of
Yeah,
course
that
I
makes
am.
sense. That makes sense.
We're giving away 75% of that to go into the infrastructure in that area because it's crazy money. So that's why we do these deals. So So the school district, guess what? Do they have housing going on there? No. So they're just getting, they can either have their little $1,300 or they can have their $42 million. So they usually say yes to me. And I usually come in at a 50% with them, which is their policy. So it's a numbers game, but it's a way for you guys to say, okay, we need this. This is what we need.
It's good options, yeah.
And then you find a developer that's willing to come to the table and negotiate with you. And if you get the development project that you want and you get the infrastructure that you want, it's a win-win for everybody.
I would say there's less
Risk,
risk with the PID for the
Absolutely.
city than the CRA.
agreed,
Just,
You two should come over here, you look all lonely over there.
agreed.
They left us.
I know.
But there are instances where you definitely want to use both. There are instances when you definitely want to use both. Should we leave it at that tonight? I said it was going to be an hour and I'm way over. I'm sorry.
It was good.
Sorry, I'm that person, but is this available, like, a
Yeah.
PowerPoint that you have?
Yeah, I'll
I
shoot
mean,
over to
I
Sherry.
can take screenshots, but.
Yeah, no, I'll shoot over to Sherry. Yeah. Or actually, Malcolm, just snag it. It's on the.
I took it already.
Okay, Malcolm's got it.
Well, you have that, like I put it on the.
Yeah, I saved it.
Okay.
10% has to go to affordable housing. What does that look like? What does that mean as far as how we?
That is really vague in the state statute. So I'll tell you, we're using the Nordic Valley one that we just did. They're using it for employee housing. So we're actually going to give it back to them and we put in their development agreement they had to build 30 units of employee housing, and so we're letting them have that back.
That's good.
And those are all things that can be negotiated. Keep that in mind. Everything's negotiable. It's all negotiable. Cool. All right. You guys want to go home and get dinner? I do. I haven't eaten today. It's been one of those days. All right, Sherry.
Yes.
Well, you guys have any other questions?
Any other questions for Stephanie? Okay, so then I guess maybe I'll have,
This is just a generic summary of the kind of the facilitated planning that I do. We can custom tailor it however you guys want, but this is just kind of a generic outline of what I do with the other cities.
and then I guess I can have Morgan reach out to you and see if you're interested in having Stephanie come back. I think it would be very valuable to us as a city. It's a free service that the county provides, so we'll be in touch.
Okay.
So, yes, thank you so much for coming and thank you to all of you. Any other questions?
Yeah, great questions, you guys.
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
You are welcome.
Thanks for your time.
Of course.
Thanks. So it's something.
A win for